It starts like countless other drives home after a long day. Streetlights paint streaks on the wet pavement, the city settling into its nightly rhythm. Daniel Williams, a man known for his quiet intellect and measured responses, navigates the familiar streets, his mind still partially occupied by the complex case files he left on his desk. Then the sudden jarring flash of red and blue explodes in his rearview mirror. A traffic stop. Annoying perhaps, but seemingly routine, until it isn't. Officer Kincaid approaches, coiled tension radiating from him, his questions immediately laced with suspicion, his demeanor aggressive. When Daniel, calm and composed, simply asks to understand the reason for the stop, exercising a basic civil right, Kincaid's fragile control shatters. Fueled by prejudice and rage at perceived defiance, he does the unthinkable. He slaps Daniel hard across the face, a raw, stinging act of violence under the color of authority. Kincaid thinks he just put another black man in his place, asserting dominance through physical assault. What Officer Kincaid, in his blinding arrogance, cannot possibly comprehend is that the man he just assaulted isn't just another citizen. He's Daniel Williams, Esquire, a highly respected civil rights attorney who has dedicated his life to fighting exactly this kind of abuse. Kincaid didn't just assault a driver, he assaulted the law itself, represented by the man whose cheek now burns. A legal firestorm is about to ignite, promising exposure, accountability, and a courtroom reckoning Kincaid never saw coming. Stick around. The moment this officer realizes who he just laid hands on is pure, unadulterated karma. And hey, as we get into this, let us know where you're watching from. What city, state, or country are you in? Drop it in the comments. We value this community sharing these stories together. Ready to find out exactly how it all went down. Buckle up. Let's dive right in. Rain slicked the asphalt of Market Street, reflecting the neon glow of storefronts in shimmering, distorted patterns as Daniel Williams guided his modest sedan towards home. It was late, past 9 p.m., and the remnants of a grueling deposition still clung to his thoughts. Witness inconsistencies, procedural nuances, the constant strategic chess match of litigation. He was tired, looking forward to shedding the suit and tie, maybe pouring a glass of scotch and unwinding with some jazz. He signaled cleanly, slowed appropriately for a yellow light, his driving meticulous, almost automatic, the ingrained habit of someone who respected rules, both on the road and in the courtroom. The sudden bloom of flashing police lights directly behind him felt less like a surprise and more like a weary sigh materializing in his rearview mirror. He pulled over immediately, smoothly gliding to the curb beneath a flickering street lamp, ensuring ample space, killing the engine and activating his hazard lights. He lowered his driver's side window about halfway and placed both hands visibly on the top of the steering wheel, the familiar, learned ritual kicking in: announce presence, minimize perceived threat, comply. The patrol car door slammed shut, the sound sharp in the rainy quiet. Officer Kincaid approached Daniel's window, his movements tight, almost aggressive. He was younger than Daniel expected, maybe late 20s or early 30s, but carried himself with an exaggerated swagger, his hand resting pointedly on his holstered weapon. Rain plastered strands of dark hair to his forehead, and his eyes, when they finally met Daniel's, held a look of impatient hostility, already assuming confrontation. He didn't bother with greetings or identifying himself immediately. He shone his flashlight beam directly into Daniel's eyes, a deliberately disorienting tactic. "License and registration," Kincaid snapped, his voice clipped, unfriendly. Daniel blinked against the harsh light but kept his voice calm, measured. "Certainly, officer. May I ask the reason for the stop first?" It was a simple, standard question, well within his rights, delivered politely. Kincaid visibly bristled. The flashlight beam wavered slightly, intensifying on Daniel's face. "Reason is I pulled you over. Now give me the damn license and registration before this gets complicated." The before hung heavy with implied threat. Daniel maintained his composure, though a familiar mix of frustration and caution began to simmer beneath the surface. This wasn't procedure, this was ego, likely tinged with prejudice. "Okay, officer," Daniel said slowly, deliberately narrating his actions. I'm reaching into my jacket pocket now for my wallet. He retrieved his wallet, extracted his license, and I'm now reaching slowly towards the glove compartment for the registration and insurance. He produced the documents, holding them out through the window gap. Kincaid snatched them impatiently, his gaze flicking between the documents and Daniel's face with open suspicion. "Car registered to you?" "Yes, officer." "Where you coming from?" "My office downtown." "Working late?" The question felt less like curiosity and more like an interrogation designed to find inconsistencies. "Yes, I had some case files to review." "Case files?" Kincaid smirked, a condescending twist of his lips. "What kind of case files keep a guy like you working so late?" The phrase, "guy like you," dripped with racial undertones. Daniel ignored the bait. "I'm an attorney, officer." He stated it simply, factually. Kincaid's smirk didn't fade. If anything, it widened with disbelief or derision. "An attorney, right, and I'm the King of England." He handed the documents back, dismissively. "All right, a counselor. Your taillights." "Hout," Daniel frowned slightly. "My taillight?" "Officer, I checked my lights before leaving the garage this evening. Are you certain?" He wasn't arguing, merely seeking clarification, knowing full well his car maintenance was impeccable. But Kincaid interpreted the question as defiance, a challenge to his authority from someone he had already decided didn't belong in this car, in this part of town, questioning him. "Are you calling me a liar?" Kincaid's voice hardened instantly, his hand dropping again to rest menacingly on his weapon. "You think I don't know a busted tail light when I see one?" "No, officer," Daniel said calmly, refusing to be intimidated. "I'm simply asking for clarification. Perhaps you could show me which light is malfunctioning." This perfectly reasonable request seemed to ignite Kincaid's short fuse. The pretense of a legitimate traffic stop dissolved completely, replaced by raw, unchecked aggression, fueled by prejudice and wounded pride. Officer Kincaid's face contorted with sudden explosive rage. Daniel's calm persistence, his refusal to simply accept the flimsy pretext for the stop without question, his quiet assertion of his right to understand the alleged violation. Kincaid clearly perceived it all as insolence, a direct challenge from someone he had already racially profiled and dismissed. The fact that Daniel claimed to be an attorney likely fueled his anger further, perhaps seen as an arrogant lie or an attempt to intimidate him. The carefully maintained barrier between professional duty and personal prejudice crumbled completely. "You trying to be a smart-ass?" Kincaid spat, leaning down aggressively towards the open window, invading Daniel's personal space. His voice was low, menacing, vibrating with contained fury. "You think you can question me? You think knowing a few fancy words makes you special?" Daniel remained still, hands still visible on the wheel, but his eyes held Kincaid's gaze steadily. He refused to show fear, refused to shrink under the verbal assault. "Officer," he began, intending to reiterate his rights calmly, perhaps cite the relevant statute regarding traffic stops, "I simply believe I have the right to understand the specific—" He never finished the sentence. With a sudden, violent movement that seemed shocking even in the context of his aggression, Kincaid lashed out. His open hand cracked across Daniel's left cheek with stunning force. The sound was sharp, ugly, swallowed quickly by the rainy night air but echoing deafeningly inside the car. Daniel's head snapped to the side from the impact, stars momentarily exploding behind his eyes. A sharp, stinging pain radiated across his face, immediate and intense. The sheer shock of the physical assault, the blatant violation by a uniformed officer, during what should have been a routine interaction, left him momentarily breathless. He could taste the faint metallic tang of blood inside his mouth where his cheek might have scraped against his teeth. For a beat there was absolute silence, broken only by the drumming rain and the idling engine of the patrol car behind him. Daniel slowly turned his head back, facing forward, not looking directly at Kincaid immediately. He took a slow, deliberate breath, fighting down the surge of adrenaline, the instinctive urge to react with anger or fear. His legal training, his years of navigating tense courtroom confrontations, kicked in, demanding control, demanding observation, demanding strategy, even amidst the raw shock and stinging pain. He needed to remain calm, assess the situation, gather information, Reacting emotionally would only escalate the situation, potentially putting him in further danger and jeopardizing any future recourse. His cheek throbbed, a physical testament to the abuse of power he had just endured. Kincaid stood frozen for a second, perhaps surprised by his own loss of control, his chest heaving slightly. Then, seeing Daniel's lack of immediate, overt reaction, his face hardened again, twisting into a mask of defensive justification. "See what happens when you don't show respect," Kincaid hissed, trying to regain dominance, trying to frame the assault as a consequence of Daniel's own actions. "Maybe that'll teach you to keep your mouth shut next time an officer tells you something." He seemed to be daring Daniel to react, perhaps hoping for an excuse to escalate further, to drag him out of the car, to make an arrest based on manufactured resistance. Daniel remained silent, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the rain-streaked windshield. He focused on controlling his breathing, on compartmentalizing the pain and the outrage. He consciously catalogued details: the officer's face, his approximate height and build, the distinct smell of stale coffee and wet wool emanating from him, the specific words he used, the exact nature of the assault. Most importantly, his eyes flicked subtly towards the officer's chest, memorizing the badge number clearly visible under the streetlight, 714. Kincaid seemed momentarily unsure how to proceed, faced not with fear or anger, but with an unnerving, disciplined stillness. Finally, perhaps realizing he had crossed a line and wanting to end the encounter quickly now, Kincaid scoffed dismissively. "Get that taillight fixed, counselor," he sneered, throwing the word back like an insult. He stepped back from the car, turned abruptly without issuing any citation or further instruction, and strode back towards his patrol car, radiating a false bravado that didn't quite conceal the tremor of uncertainty that now seemed to underpin his movements. He had asserted his dominance through violence, but Daniel's unexpected composure seemed to have unsettled him. Daniel watched in his side mirror as Kincaid got back into his car, the engine revved, and the patrol car pulled away, disappearing into the rainy night, leaving Daniel alone in the sudden, profound quiet, the stinging imprint of Kincaid's hand burning on his cheek like a brand. The silence in the car felt immense, heavy with the weight of the assault and the burgeoning resolve forming within him. Daniel Williams sat motionless in his car for several long minutes after Officer Kincaid drove away. The only sounds were the rhythmic sweep of his windshield wipers pushing aside the steady rain and the quiet thrum of his own engine. His cheek throbbed insistently, a raw physical reminder of the assault. He touched it gingerly with his fingertips, feeling the heat radiating from the skin, the slight swelling already beginning. He tasted blood again, metallic and sharp, confirming. He'd bitten the inside of his cheek upon impact. The initial shock was fading, replaced by a cold, calculating anger, the controlled fury of a lawyer who had just become the victim of precisely the kind of abuse he fought against every day in court. His mind, trained to analyze, categorize, and strategize, began methodically processing the event. The pretext for the stop, the non-existent busted tail light, Kincaid's immediate hostility and biased questioning, the escalation based on Daniel simply asserting his basic rights, the explicit verbal threats, and finally, the assault itself, battery under the color of law, clear violations of departmental policy, state law, and federal civil rights statutes. Kincaid hadn't just lost his temper, he had committed multiple actionable offenses. Daniel took several slow, deep breaths, forcing his racing heart to slow, pushing down the visceral urge to slam his fist against the steering wheel. Emotion wouldn't serve him now. He needed clarity, documentation, a plan. He reached for his phone not to call anyone yet, but to utilize its functions as an immediate recording device. He activated the voice memo app. Speaking clearly and calmly, despite the lingering tremor in his voice and the pain in his cheek, he began dictating a detailed account of the entire incident, starting from the moment he saw the flashing lights until Kincaid drove away. He included the time, the location, Market Street near the Elm intersection, Kincaid's physical description, the badge number he'd memorized, 714, the exact sequence of events, the specific words exchanged, the nature of the assault, and the fabricated reason given for the stop. He documented everything while it was fresh, precise, creating his own contemporaneous record. He knew the value of such immediate documentation in any future legal proceedings. Next, he used his phone's camera. Angling it carefully using the rearview mirror, he took several clear photographs of his face, capturing the distinct red mark blooming on his left cheek, the slight swelling, and the small cut inside his lip. Time-stamped photographic evidence of injury, however minor it might seem to others, could be crucial. He saved the voice memo and the photos securely. He then sat back again, considering his next move. Drive straight to the precinct to file an immediate report. Go to the hospital ER to have the injury officially documented. Call his law partners. Call his family. Each option had pros and cons. Going directly to the precinct tonight, while still emotional and potentially facing officers protective of their colleague, might not be the most strategic move. He needed to present his case calmly, professionally, backed by evidence and legal standing, not just raw anger. Going to the ER was a possibility for documentation, but the injury itself wasn't severe enough to warrant urgent medical care, and it might unnecessarily escalate things before he was ready. Calling his partners would bring immediate support, but he wanted to handle the initial steps himself, as Daniel Williams, the citizen, before bringing the full weight of his firm into play. He decided the best course of action was to go home, document everything thoroughly, sleep if possible, though he doubted it, and then tomorrow morning proceed methodically. He would contact his primary care physician for an appointment to document the injury officially. He would draft a formal, detailed complaint letter himself, referencing specific statutes and departmental policies violated, and then he would personally deliver that complaint to the Internal Affairs Division, perhaps requesting a meeting with the highest possible authority within that division. He would present himself not just as a victim, but as an attorney, demanding accountability according to the letter of the law. He knew it would be a fight. He knew the blue wall of silence was a real phenomenon. He knew Officer Kincaid would likely deny everything or twist the narrative. But Kincaid had made a critical error. He had assaulted not just a citizen, but a citizen who intimately understood the legal system, the rules of evidence, and the precise pressure points required to dismantle a false narrative and expose abuse. The stinging on his cheek wasn't just pain, it was fuel. He put the car in drive, pulling away from the curb smoothly, his face set in grim determination. The legal storm was brewing, and Daniel Williams was preparing to unleash it. The following morning, Daniel Williams walked into the imposing granite edifice of the city's police headquarters. He was dressed not in the casual clothes he'd worn the night before, but in one of his well-tailored charcoal suits, crisp white. Shirt and conservative silk tie. He carried a slim leather briefcase. He looked every inch the successful attorney, projecting an aura of quiet confidence and professional seriousness. His cheek still bore a faint, fading redness, visible only upon close inspection, but the memory of the slap felt as fresh and insulting as it had hours earlier. He had already visited his doctor, who had documented the facial contusion and the laceration inside his mouth, adding a medical record to his growing file of evidence. Now it was time to confront the system directly. He bypassed the general inquiries desk and proceeded directly to the window marked Internal Affairs Division, Professional Standards Bureau. A uniformed officer, older than Kincaid, with tired eyes and a slightly skeptical expression, looked up from his paperwork as Daniel approached. "Help you?" the officer asked, his tone neutral but weary, suggesting he'd heard countless complaints before. "Yes," Daniel replied, his voice calm and level. "I am here to file a formal complaint regarding an incident involving Officer Kincaid, badge number 714, which occurred last night at approximately 9:15 p.m. on Market Street near Elm." He stated the facts clearly, concisely, providing the core information up front. The officer's expression didn't change much, perhaps a flicker of recognition at Kincaid's name, perhaps not. He pushed a standard multi-part complaint form across the counter. "Fill this out completely, provide all details, sign at the bottom. Someone will review it in due course." The familiar bureaucratic dismissal. Daniel didn't take the form immediately. Instead, he placed his briefcase on the counter and opened it. He removed a neatly typed, multi-page document. "Thank you, officer," he said politely. "However, I have prepared a formal, detailed complaint letter myself, which includes specific allegations regarding violations of departmental policy, state penal codes concerning assault and battery, and potential federal civil rights violations under Section 1983. He placed the document gently on the counter. This letter outlines the incident in detail, including Officer Kincaid's fabrication of a traffic violation pretext, his unprofessional and biased conduct, the physical assault he committed against my person, and the relevant legal statutes. The IA officer blinked, looking slightly taken aback. This was clearly not the typical handwritten complaint form filled out by an agitated citizen. The mention of specific legal codes and federal statutes signaled something different. He picked up the letter hesitantly, his eyes scanning the first page, noting the professional formatting and precise legal language. Daniel continued smoothly. I have also included with my complaint a copy of the medical report from my physician documenting the physical injury sustained during the assault. He produced a sealed envelope containing the doctor's report and placed it beside the letter. Furthermore, I wish to inform the Internal Affairs Division that I possess contemporaneous evidence, including a detailed voice memo recorded immediately following the incident and time-stamped photographs documenting the injury. He paused for effect. And I request that Officer Kincaid's patrol vehicle MVR data and any relevant dispatch logs or body cam footage, though I do not believe he activated his body cam during the unlawful stop, be preserved immediately as potential evidence. The IA officer looked genuinely surprised now, maybe even slightly alarmed. The level of preparedness, the specific legal references, the mention of multiple forms of corroborating evidence, this was far beyond the norm. He looked back at Daniel, assessing his sharp suit, his articulate speech, his unwavering gaze. The pieces began to click into place. You said that you're an attorney, the officer asked, his tone shifting from weary indifference to cautious respect. I am, Daniel confirmed quietly. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and withdrew his wallet. He didn't just flash it, he opened it and presented his state bar card, clear and official, alongside his driver's license for comparison. Daniel Williams, attorney at law. My office address and bar number are included in the complaint letter. The IA officer stared at the bar card, then back at Daniel's face, realization dawning fully. An officer had allegedly assaulted a lawyer during a traffic stop, a lawyer who clearly knew precisely how to document and pursue such a complaint. The potential ramifications suddenly felt immense. The officer swallowed hard, his bureaucratic facade crumbling. Okay, Mr. Williams, counselor, he corrected himself quickly. Please have a seat. Let me get my supervisor immediately. Captain Howell needs to be made aware of this right away. He hastily picked up the phone, punching in an extension, his earlier weariness replaced by urgent efficiency. Daniel had bypassed the slow lane. By presenting himself not just as a victim but as a legal professional armed with evidence and knowledge of the system, he had immediately escalated the situation, ensuring his complaint wouldn't just disappear into a pile on a desk. The legal storm was making landfall. Captain Howell, the commanding officer of the Internal Affairs Division, arrived within minutes. He was a stern, experienced man whose face seemed etched with the permanent weariness of dealing with the worst aspects of police work. He greeted Daniel curtly but professionally, inviting him into a private interview room, a significant departure from the usual procedure of simply accepting a form at the window. The initial IA officer hovered nervously in the background before being dismissed by Howell. Mr. Williams, Howell began, gesturing for Daniel to sit across from him at a small table after briefly reviewing the complaint letter Daniel had submitted. I've read your preliminary statement. These are extremely serious allegations against Officer Kincaid. His tone was grave, non-committal, but clearly indicating he understood the severity. They are serious, Captain, because the actions were serious, Daniel replied calmly, meeting Howell's gaze. Officer Kincaid initiated an unlawful stop based on a fabricated pretext, conducted himself unprofessionally and with clear bias, and when I asserted my basic right to understand the reason for the stop, he physically assaulted me. He recounted the events again, concisely but powerfully, referencing the details in his letter, the medical report and the evidence he possessed. He didn't raise his voice, didn't display overt anger, letting the facts themselves convey the outrage. Howell listened intently, occasionally making notes on a pad. He asked clarifying questions, the exact words used, the precise sequence of events, the nature of the physical contact. Daniel answered each question precisely, his legal training ensuring his responses were clear, factual, and consistent. He emphasized Kincaid's escalating anger, seemingly triggered by Daniel's calm demeanor and assertion of rights. "You state here," Howell said, tapping the complaint letter, "that you believe his actions were motivated, at least in part, by racial bias." "Captain," Daniel replied evenly, "Officer Kincaid's comments, questioning my profession, asking what a guy like me was doing working late, his immediate assumption of hostility when I asked simple questions, combined with the unprovoked escalation and physical assault, strongly suggest that my race was a factor in his perception and treatment of me. His actions were not those of an officer conducting a professional traffic stop. They were those of an officer asserting dominance over someone he prejudged based on race." Howell nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "And you're certain about the badge number, 714? "Absolutely certain," Daniel confirmed. "I made a specific point to memorize it immediately following the assault." "Okay." Howell leaned back slightly. "Here's what happens now, Mr. Williams. We will conduct a thorough investigation. Officer Kincaid will be formally interviewed, likely after being placed on administrative duty pending the outcome. We will retrieve all relevant records, dispatch logs, his activity reports, any available MVR or body cam footage, though your assertion he didn't activate his is noted. We will review his history, including any prior complaints." He paused. "Given your status as an attorney and the nature of the allegation, particularly the physical assault, this investigation will receive priority handling." Daniel appreciated the assurance but knew the internal process could still be fraught with challenges. "Captain," he said firmly, "while I respect the internal affairs process, I need to be clear. Should this investigation attempt to minimize, dismiss, or unduly delay addressing Officer Kincaid's actions, I am fully prepared to pursue all available legal remedies, including filing a formal civil rights lawsuit against Officer Kincaid individually, and the department potentially, and submitting my evidence to the District Attorney's Office for consideration of criminal charges against the officer." He wasn't making a threat, merely stating his intentions clearly, ensuring Howell understood the stakes involved. Howell met his gaze, a flicker of understanding, perhaps even grudging respect in his eyes. He knew Daniel wasn't bluffing. An assault complaint from an ordinary citizen might get slow-walked. An assault complaint from a well-spoken attorney with documented injuries, contemporaneous evidence, and a clear willingness to litigate, that was a different category entirely. "Understood, Counselor," Howell said quietly. "We will proceed thoroughly and objectively. You will be kept informed." Daniel gathered his briefcase. "Thank you, Captain. I expect nothing less." He stood, offered a curt nod, and left the interview room, leaving Captain Howell with the detailed complaint, the medical report, and the undeniable weight of knowing that Officer Kincaid had potentially assaulted not just a citizen, but a lawyer who now held the power to bring the full force of the legal system down upon him, and potentially the department itself. The initial confrontation was over, but the real battle, the one fought with documents, depositions, and legal precedent, was just beginning. Daniel felt the faint throb in his cheek, not just as a reminder of the injury, but as a promise of the justice he intended to exact. Captain Howell initiated the internal affairs investigation into Officer Kincaid immediately, assigning 2 senior detectives from the Professional Standards Bureau. The first step, as promised, was to retrieve all available records. The dispatch logs confirmed Daniel's account of the time and location of the stop. Kincaid's activity log simply noted a traffic stop for a faulty tail light, issued a verbal warning and cleared. No mention of any confrontation, obstruction, or physical contact. Crucially, as Daniel had suspected, Kincaid's body-worn camera had not been activated during the encounter, a significant policy violation in itself, especially for any confrontational stop. The patrol car's MVR, mobile video recorder, was reviewed. While it captured the flashing lights and the audio of Kincaid interacting with dispatch before and after, the crucial moments of the interaction at Daniel's window were outside its fixed viewing angle, and the audio was muffled by the rain and distance. This lack of corroborating video from official sources initially seemed like a potential hurdle for Daniel's complaint. Officer Kincaid was summoned to Internal Affairs the following day. Advised of his right to have a union representative present, he arrived looking pale but defiant, accompanied by a stone-faced union lawyer. Presented with Daniel Williams's formal complaint, Kincaid vehemently denied the allegations. He stuck to his initial story: faulty taillight stop, driver became argumentative and mouthy, possibly smelled faintly of alcohol, a new unsubstantiated claim, verbal warning issued. He categorically denied any physical contact, dismissing the assault claim as a complete fabrication by an arrogant lawyer trying to intimidate his way out of a legitimate stop. He portrayed himself as the calm professional dealing with an uncooperative, disrespectful citizen. He suggested Williams was likely racially motivated himself, looking for an excuse to file a complaint against a white officer. His union rep backed him, emphasizing Kincaid's years of service and questioning the complainant's motives, particularly given his profession. The IA investigators, Miller and Chen, pressed Kincaid on the discrepancies: the lack of body cam footage, the failure to issue a citation if the driver was truly obstructive, the medical report documenting Daniel's injury. Kincaid offered flimsy excuses. Body cam malfunctioned, or he forgot to activate it in the heat of the argument, decided to cut the guy a break with just a warning despite his attitude. The alleged injury must have been self-inflicted or pre-existing. His denials were forceful, practiced, hitting all the notes expected when the blue wall of silence goes up. Without definitive video evidence from the scene, it initially appeared to be shaping up as a classic he said scenario, albeit one where the complainant was a credible attorney with medical documentation. Captain Howell reviewed the initial findings with growing unease. Kincaid's story felt thin, defensive, especially the convenient body cam malfunction. Daniel Williams had presented as calm, articulate, and highly credible, but proving an assault without direct video or unbiased witnesses was notoriously difficult within the internal disciplinary system, where the benefit of the doubt often defaulted to the officer. The union would fight tooth and nail against any serious finding based solely on the complainant's word, even a lawyer's word, versus the officer's denial. Howell suspected Kincaid was lying, likely panicked after losing his temper, but proving it to the standard required for termination or criminal referral felt challenging based only on what they had so far. He instructed Detectives Miller and Chen to dig deeper into Kincaid's history. They pulled his personnel file, reviewing past performance evaluations, use of force reports, and crucially, prior citizen complaints. What they found was illuminating, if not entirely surprising. Officer Kincaid had a documented history of escalating minor encounters, particularly during traffic stops involving minority drivers. There were several prior complaints alleging verbal abuse, unprofessional conduct, and overly aggressive behavior. None had resulted in significant discipline. Most were marked unfounded or unable to sustain after Kincaid provided his version of events and the complainants lacked concrete evidence. One complaint, filed 2 years prior by a young Hispanic man alleging Kincaid had roughly pushed him during a stop for loud music, bore striking similarities in Kincaid's alleged pattern of escalating a minor issue into a confrontation based on perceived disrespect. This pattern, while not direct proof of the assault against Daniel, established a troubling history of similar conduct and potential bias, strengthening the credibility of Daniel's account. Howell briefed Daniel's attorney on the preliminary findings: Kincaid's denial, the lack of body cam footage, but also the emerging pattern of prior complaints. Daniel, receiving the update, felt a familiar frustration, but also a renewed determination. Kincaid was hiding behind denials and the system's inherent inertia. It was time to apply more pressure, to introduce evidence Kincaid and the department clearly didn't know he possessed. He instructed his attorney to formally notify Captain Howell and the city's legal department that they would be filing a civil rights lawsuit in federal court within the next 72 hours, alleging assault, battery, and violation of constitutional rights by Officer Kincaid, and potentially the city for inadequate supervision or training given his history. He also authorized his attorney to provide opposing counsel with a formal proffer of evidence, including the medical report, the contemporaneous voice memo detailing the assault, and the time-stamped photos of his injury, putting them on notice about the strength of his case beyond just his testimony. The legal gears were now grinding with serious intent, moving the battleground from the potentially biased confines of internal affairs towards the more neutral territory of a federal courtroom. The pressure on Kincaid and the department was about to intensify significantly. The formal notice of impending federal lawsuit landed on Captain Howell's desk and in the city attorney's office like a carefully aimed bombshell. Daniel Williams wasn't just complaining, he was litigating. The language in the notice, drafted by Daniel and his partners, was precise, legally sound, and deeply concerning for the city. It didn't just name Officer Kincaid. It included potential claims against the city itself under monel liability, arguing that Kincaid's actions were potentially part of a pattern or practice enabled by inadequate training or supervision, citing the newly uncovered history of similar complaints. This immediately raised the stakes far beyond a single officer's misconduct. A federal civil rights lawsuit meant depositions under oath, extensive discovery demands, including Kincaid's entire disciplinary history and training records, potentially embarrassing public testimony, and the risk of a substantial monetary judgment against the city. Attached to the notice was the proffer of evidence, a copy of the detailed medical report confirming Daniel's injuries, a transcript of the chillingly calm voice memo he recorded moments after the assault detailing Kincaid's actions and words, and copies of the clear, time-stamped photographs showing the distinct red mark on his cheek. While still lacking definitive video of the slap itself, this collection of evidence presented by a credible attorney plaintiff painted a compelling picture that directly contradicted Kincaid's denials. The voice memo, in particular, captured the immediacy and detail of the event in Daniel's own words, recorded when the shock and pain were fresh, making it powerful circumstantial evidence. The city's legal department immediately convened an urgent meeting with Captain Howell and the chief of police. The calculus shifted dramatically. This wasn't just an IA matter anymore, it was a significant legal and financial liability. Defending Kincaid in federal court, based solely on his denial against an attorney plaintiff, with medical documentation, photographic evidence, a contemporaneous recording, and a history of similar complaints against the officer, looked like an increasingly risky, potentially unwinnable proposition. The lack of body cam footage, initially perhaps seen as benefiting Kincaid by creating ambiguity, now looked like a deliberate evasion of policy, further weakening his credibility. Pressure mounted internally on Officer Kincaid. His union representative, while obligated to defend him, likely advised him of the dire situation, facing sworn depositions where his conflicting statements could be dissected by skilled attorneys, potentially facing perjury charges if his lies were exposed under oath, and knowing his problematic history was now under scrutiny, Kincaid's position became increasingly precarious. The blue wall could only protect him so far, especially when faced with concrete evidence and the threat of a costly federal lawsuit that the city administration desperately wanted to avoid. Captain Howell summoned Kincaid and his union rep for another meeting. This time, the tone was different. Howell laid out the evidence plainly: the medical report, the photos, the voice memo transcript, the pattern of prior complaints. He highlighted the policy violation regarding the body cam. He pointed out the inconsistencies in Kincaid's initial statement compared to the known facts. He strongly implied that the department's support would be limited if Kincaid continued to maintain a story contradicted by mounting evidence, especially with a federal lawsuit looming. He presented Kincaid with a choice: continue the denial and face a protracted, likely losing battle internally and in court, potentially resulting in termination and criminal charges, or consider admitting to a loss of control and accepting significant disciplinary action, perhaps short of termination, but severe enough to satisfy the complainant and mitigate the city's legal exposure. Kincaid, trapped between his crumbling lies and the severe consequences staring him in the face, finally began to crack. The arrogant defiance faded, replaced by a desperate, cornered fear. He consulted privately with his union rep, weighing the terrible options. The rep, likely seeing the writing on the wall, probably advised cutting his losses, admitting to unprofessional conduct and perhaps inappropriate physical contact, while likely still trying to frame it as less than an intentional assault, in hopes of negotiating a disciplinary outcome less severe than termination and avoiding criminal charges. Daniel Williams, through his calculated legal strategy and the careful presentation of evidence, had effectively used the system's own pressure points, the fear of litigation, the weight of documented history, the internal politics of liability, to corner the officer who had assaulted him. He hadn't needed a video of the slap itself. He had leveraged the surrounding facts and the power of the law to make Kincaid's denial untenable. The leverage was working. A resolution, though, perhaps not as dramatic as a courtroom conviction, felt imminent. Faced with the undeniable evidence compiled by Daniel, the looming federal lawsuit, his own contradictory statements, the damning pattern of prior complaints, and likely intense pressure from his superiors and union representative advising him, to mitigate the damage, Officer Kincaid's defiant stance crumbled. In a subsequent tense meeting with Internal Affairs and the city's legal team, Kincaid, through his union lawyer, admitted to unprofessional conduct and inappropriate physical contact during the traffic stop with Daniel Williams. He maintained predictably that the contact wasn't a malicious assault, but a reactive push or shove resulting from a loss of composure during a verbally aggressive encounter, a self-serving minimization, but a crucial admission nonetheless. That directly contradicted his initial flat denial of any physical contact. He conceded that his report was incomplete and that failing to activate his body cam was a serious policy violation. This admission, however watered down, was enough. It provided the city and the police department with the grounds they needed to take decisive action while potentially avoiding the worst outcomes of a federal trial. A settlement agreement was rapidly negotiated between the city, the police union, and Daniel Williams, represented by his firm. The terms were significant. Officer Kincaid would accept an immediate, lengthy suspension without pay, often a precursor to forced resignation or retirement, to avoid formal termination on his record. He would be required to attend intensive anger management and de-escalation counseling, as well as mandatory documented training specifically addressing racial bias. He would issue a formal written apology to Daniel Williams, acknowledging his unprofessional conduct and inappropriate actions. Furthermore, the city agreed to implement specific departmental reforms stemming from the case, including stricter enforcement of body cam activation policies, enhanced supervisor oversight for officers with multiple citizen complaints, and incorporating Daniel's anonymized case study into future bias and de-escalation training modules. Crucially for Daniel, the settlement also included a commitment from the district attorney's office, influenced by the city's desire to resolve all related matters, not to pursue criminal assault charges against Kincaid based on his admission to the lesser offense of inappropriate physical contact and the agreed-upon disciplinary actions. While a part of Daniel felt Kincaid deserved criminal prosecution, he recognized the practical realities and the significant victory achieved through the settlement. Kincaid was effectively removed from patrol duty, facing severe consequences, and systemic changes were being implemented. Accepting the settlement allowed for a guaranteed immediate outcome rather than the uncertainties and delays of a potential criminal trial or a protracted civil suit. Daniel reviewed the settlement terms carefully with his partners. It wasn't perfect, perhaps, but it achieved his primary goals: accountability for Kincaid, validation of his own experience, and concrete steps towards preventing similar incidents in the future. The suspension was substantial. The mandatory counseling and retraining addressed the root issues. The apology, however forced, was an acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and the departmental reforms offered a glimmer of systemic progress. He agreed to the terms. The news of Kincaid's suspension and the settlement agreement sent ripples through the department. While some officers grumbled about the outcome or defended Kincaid privately, many others recognized the inevitability given the key circumstances, particularly Kincaid's history, and the fact that the complainant was a lawyer. The case served as a stark reminder that unprofessional conduct, especially when fueled by bias and involving physical contact, carried serious risks, and that the blue wall was not always impenetrable, particularly when faced with a credible, well-documented complaint from someone equipped to navigate the legal system. For Daniel, the resolution brought a complex mix of emotions. There was satisfaction in achieving accountability, relief that the ordeal was formally over, but also a lingering sadness about the incident itself and the systemic issues it represented. The faint mark on his cheek had long since faded, but the memory of the slap, the raw sting of injustice and racial prejudice remained. He hadn't sought this fight, but when it came to him, he had met it not with reciprocal anger, but with the tools he knew best: the law, meticulous preparation, and unwavering resolve. He had reclaimed his dignity not by returning violence, but by expertly wielding the power of the legal system against the very abuse it was supposed to prevent. In the months following the settlement, Daniel Williams found the incident with Officer Kincaid subtly yet profoundly influencing his work and his perspective. While the immediate anger had cooled, replaced by the grim satisfaction of achieving a measure of justice, the experience left an indelible mark. It reinforced his commitment to his chosen field, civil rights law, imbuing it with a renewed, deeply personal sense of urgency. He had always fought passionately for victims of police misconduct and racial discrimination, but now, having personally felt the sting of that abuse, the empathy he felt for his clients deepened into a visceral understanding. He knew firsthand the feeling of powerlessness during an unjust stop, the humiliation of being prejudged, the shock of physical violation under the color of law, and the frustrating battle to make the system acknowledge the truth. This first-hand experience informed his approach in the courtroom and in negotiations. He found himself even more meticulous in documenting evidence, more tenacious in deposing officers, more attuned to the subtle ways bias could manifest in official reports and testimonies. He shared his anonymized story, without violating settlement confidentiality, with younger associates at his firm and during guest lectures at local law schools, using it as a potent case study on knowing one's rights, the importance of contemporaneous documentation, and the strategic use of legal leverage against systemic inertia. He emphasized that while not everyone had the resources of an attorney, understanding basic rights and documenting encounters could empower any citizen facing a similar situation. The departmental reforms implemented as part of the settlement, stricter body cam enforcement, enhanced bias training using his case study, were monitored closely by Daniel and civil rights organizations. While acknowledging that policy changes on paper didn't always translate to immediate changes on the street, he saw them as necessary, incremental steps. He participated actively in community forums discussing police-citizen relations, lending his legal expertise and measured perspective to difficult conversations. He wasn't naive enough to believe one incident could overhaul decades of ingrained culture, but he refused to be cynical. Progress, however slow and hard-fought, was still progress. He never encountered Officer Kincaid again. Kincaid reportedly completed his lengthy suspension and the mandatory counseling, but ultimately chose early retirement rather than face the scrutiny and likely desk assignment that awaited him upon return. His career ended not with honor, but under the shadow of disgrace, a quiet footnote in the department's disciplinary records. For Daniel, the memory of the slap eventually faded from a throbbing injury to a dull scar, not physically visible, but internally present. It served as a constant reminder of the fragility of justice and the ongoing need for vigilance. He continued his work, representing clients who had faced far worse abuses, often without the resources or legal knowledge he possessed. He fought for them with even greater ferocity, fueled by the knowledge that his own encounter, however violating, was just one small example of a much larger struggle. His resolve as an attorney, always strong, had been tempered in the fire of personal experience, emerging harder, sharper, and more committed than ever to using the law not just as a profession, but as a weapon against the very injustices he had briefly but unforgettably endured. He knew the fight was far from over, but he was precisely where he needed to be, in the thick of it, armed with the law, demanding accountability, one case at a time. Authority can be abused. A badge, a uniform, the power to stop and detain. These tools meant to uphold the law can be twisted by prejudice and ego into instruments of oppression. Officer Kincaid saw Daniel Williams not as a citizen with rights, but as a target for his frustration, someone he could dominate, someone whose simple questions felt like defiance worthy of physical assault. He relied on his authority, his perceived impunity, and Daniel's assumed powerlessness. He never imagined his victim wasn't just aware of his rights, but professionally equipped to defend them at the highest level. For those of us who understand the precariousness of encounters with unchecked authority, who know the fear that can accompany demanding your basic rights, especially when facing bias, this story resonates powerfully. We know that knowledge is power, but exercising that knowledge in the face of aggression requires immense courage. Maybe you've felt intimidated into silence. Maybe you've questioned whether asserting your rights would only make things worse. Maybe you've felt the sting of being dismissed or disrespected by someone who holds power over you. But Daniel's story shows us the profound strength that lies in knowing the law and demanding it be respected. His power wasn't just in his bar card, it was in his composure under duress, his meticulous documentation, his strategic deployment of legal knowledge. He demonstrated that resilience isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet, unwavering insistence on accountability. He turned a degrading assault into a catalyst for change, reminding us that the law, when wielded skillfully and justly, can be the most effective shield against those who try to hide their abuses behind a badge. It shows that standing tall means not only knowing your rights, but having the courage and the strategy to demand they be upheld. So if this story moved you, if it inspired you, if it simply reminded you of the importance of knowing your rights and demanding respect, please don't keep it quiet. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to see that knowledge is a powerful tool against injustice, and that even in the face of abuse, dignity and the law can prevail. Until next time, stay informed, stay resolute, and never stop fighting for accountability.